Oh no. Am I dead? I'm floating above my body. What's that? Looks like I have guests. But I forgot to flush the toilet.
The Last Responder.
Hey guys, welcome to episode 2, season 1 of Last Responder. I'm hoping you guys listened last week, but if you didn't, I'm going to update you a little bit on what we're doing here. We're showcasing some professions in the death care industry, primarily the removal technician as well as the cleanup technician. So I don't think the removal technician gets a lot of attention or appreciation for what they do, but they have one of the most difficult jobs when it comes to responding to a death scene as far as moving and loading and transporting the decedent. We are not going to be using any names or dates or locations because of the municipal contracts that we have. So everything will be pretty vague, and we're all going by aliases, so nobody knows who we are. So I'm the boogeyman. I got Bruce Sackworth is producing the show today for Grave Concern Media, and our guest is going to be the organic mechanic. And he's here to talk about memorable or interesting removal that he has been a part of. So how you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing good. Boogeyman, how are you?
I'm doing good. I appreciate you being here today and being willing to share a story with us. So, man, first of all, I was just going to ask you, like, how you got into this and why you're doing what you're doing.
Well, I didn't really have any previous experience in the funeral industry at all. I had a friend who told me they thought I might work well in it, which I don't really know what to make of that.
It's like you got a face for radio, is what that's like.
She was a goth girl, so I took it as a compliment.
Oh, all right.
But my previous job was working in a boxing gym in which there's very little tact or finesse at all involved, unlike with this type of work. So I did like the idea that it would be a physical job. I also like the idea of it being something a bit more unconventional and something that would just test your limits, something that's just not a lot of demands put on you that are not expected of the average worker. So that all kind of held a special appeal to me.
So when somebody asks you, hey, what do you do for a living? What do you tell them?
I'll generally be pretty honest. I don't really butter it up or anything. Sometimes I might preface it by telling them, it's kind of weird. And then they just get more intrigued, really.
Sure.
And so I just let loose. And then you either get the reaction that it's, oh, that's nice. Or they're just like, oh, good on you. And like, I think you guys are awesome. It's like they've just kind of already had an idea.
Does everybody ask, though, do they ask what's your craziest story? Or, I mean, do they push past that? Do they want any additional details about anything ever?
Not usually. Nobody, I think because it is something, kind of like you say, it's not very well known, so many people don't really know exactly what. They just assume you're probably just going to someone's house to pick up their grandma. They don't really know everything else that goes along with the job.
Well, I know you have gotten into some pretty crazy stuff. And so I don't know if or the crazier the better for you?
Yeah, I like all kinds of calls. I feel like there's something to glean from any of them. But the ones that are the most memorable are definitely the ones that tend to be under the more extreme circumstances.
Sure. And it's funny how that stuff sneaks up, because you could be sitting on your ass for an hour in the morning reading a book, and then all of a sudden this crazy thing comes in that sends you miles away to clean up some wacky situation or some really difficult. You just never know what's going to pop in and when. So, But I do think it's great that you use your off time effectively. There's a lot of people that when they're waiting between calls, they just sit on their ass and do nothing. So I do like that you use your off time productively.
Yeah, I try to. I'm getting older, and the job is kind of hard on the body. But whenever I got the motivation, I'll be, find something to tinker with on the side.
Yeah, yeah. What kind of story do you have for us today?
The one, I actually figured you'd probably enjoy this one a good bit because it's, of all the calls I've had, it was probably the one that felt the most like being in a horror film.
Oh, all right.
We were told to come to a call, which a lot of times there'll be what is called an unattended death, where basically someone passes away and no one is around for it. And sometimes they can be discovered pretty quickly. Sometimes it may be a couple of weeks. In this case, it had been a while. So we knew ahead of time that it was going to be what we in the funeral industry will affectionately refer to as a decomp call. But aside from that, we were also advised that there were going to be a few other hazards as well. For one thing, there had been a leak in the roof of the place where the decedent was. So everything inside was completely just wet, like the carpet and everything was soaked with moisture, just sopping. Also, all the lights were out, so it was totally dark. When we went in, the only light there really was just a light from a TV that was just going off loudly. And then, other than that, we had our flashlights with us, which you could just, in the beams of the flashlight, you could see the mold spores just floating in the air. They told us to put on a Tyvek suit, just for our protection, in case of any bed bugs, lice, and also a face mask, just to keep the mold spores out. But we had to go in through this dark area until we had been led to the bathroom, which, when we got there, we saw the decedent dead and decomposing on the toilet. He was pretty far along. There were maggots all over him. And on top of that, there were, from the kneecap down, the legs had been totally eaten away by rats. So he was partially skeletonized. It was just the stuff of nightmares. It was... And just like to confirm, so when you're going to one of those, like an unattended death, mm-hmm. Typically, I mean, it could have just happened a couple hours ago, or it could have happened a couple weeks ago. Nobody, I mean, in this case, obviously some time had passed, but I don't know if you remember in that National Lampoon's Vacation where Aunt Edna died, and they went to drop her off at the cousin's house, and nobody was home, and they left her on the back porch. Do you remember that? I remember that, yeah.
And they tied a note. So the mom says, "Did you guys learn anything from this?" And the daughter says, "Yeah, don't die unless someone's at home." And so that's what that always makes me think of, is that it's difficult when you're all by yourself, because when you pass, nobody knows. You could be there for who knows how long. So they had obviously been there for a while. Mm-hmm. The house was pretty bad, had rodent infestations, had eaten the bottom of his legs. He was covered with maggots, sitting on the can. What happened next?
At that point, it's all of the grace just goes out the window, because there's no delicate way you can remove an individual from a toilet. So we just have to lay the body bag out on the floor, which, if I remember right, was cut. It was filthy. I don't remember exactly what all was there. This was about 1.5 years ago. But you just had to lay the body bag out on the floor and then just pull him off the toilet, which was not too difficult. He wasn't a very heavy guy, which I will also say is pretty unusual for other calls I've done where someone had died on the toilet. They tend to be a little bit more girthy, I guess you would say. Other than that, though, at that point, you basically just have to get him in the bag and then just get him out of there as quickly as possible, because it is still kind of a hazardous situation.
Right.
So just for all parties, you just want to be expeditious.
Have you seen when people die on the toilet and then they'll slide off and they'll go between the toilet and the tub or something, or the toilet and the cabinet?
On any call I've had, they were typically... Well, no, I take that back. There was one I had where they were already on the side. They didn't slide off to it, but it is horrible to get them out of that, yeah. Especially if the rigor is already set in.
And I don't know how, man, but there's always an extremity, like an arm or a leg, that ends up behind the toilet, between the toilet and the wall. And I don't know how the hell that happens, but it seems to happen every single, at least for me, every single time I've been in that situation. It's not like you're just going to slide somebody out and load them up. There's always something that's weird about when they die, what direction they fall, and then how they rigor or how they stiffen up. So, so you got them loaded up, you got them out of the house, okay?
Yeah, everything else went pretty well. It was just the atmosphere was just, I mean, it felt like being in Hellraiser. It was just ominous and grim.
Was there a ton of shit in the way that you couldn't roll the cot through? Or how did you not even bring in the cot? Did you slide him out in the bag?
We left the cot outside, so yeah, we did have to slide him out in the bag. It wasn't a total hoarder situation, because there are some houses where there's just shit just everywhere, and you're just having to clear a path. This one, I mean, it was dirty in there, but I remember the pathway, at least to get him out the front door, was not too bad. It was just all, like I said, the carpet was soaking wet, so it was just gross.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't want to be wearing like jogging shoes when you go into those. Because you'll get where people die and they decomp and it soaks into the carpet and it becomes like a sludge. And if you have nylon running shoes on, they're going to get ruined pretty quick. Yeah, so I know what you're talking about. Well, the family wasn't around, right?
No, there was no family present on that one. I don't know if I never know all the details if they managed to track down next of kin or not. A lot of times on unattended deaths there are, but many times there just are not. And these are just people that just seem like they were just kind of forgotten by society in a way.
So somebody goes to do a welfare check. Somebody says, I haven't seen my neighbor for 3 weeks and his car's in the driveway. They call the police. Maybe the police go over and check on him and discover him or something like that. Or, what we saw during COVID is that as soon as COVID ended and rent started kicking back in, people were getting notices on their door, and then when they weren't acknowledging those notices, we had property managers going in and finding people deceased. Because they hadn't paid their rent, nobody had bothered them. Nobody had tried to contact them or anything like that. Well, they were in there dead for however many months before they were found because they hadn't started to pay their rent again.
Oh, man.
But, the other thing with that we find with those removals, and you're talking about that one wasn't bad, but I've talked about this before, is, there's no magic method to moving that decedent outside. And, you get, sometimes you have to just slide them out across the floor, over all the crap that's in the way, and through the different doorways. It's not like you can just magically raise them up and move them outside. It's always a challenge sometimes to get people through. And then, we've even had cases where the bag has broken. Mm-hmm. You have a shitty bag or something like that, and so you're starting to move somebody out, and the bottom of the bag breaks out from underneath. It's terrible, man, when that stuff happens. So it's always difficult no matter what you're doing, even on the easiest situations, I think. So how was the car ride with that guy? Did you leave the windows down?
It's, I'm so used to it at this point, it doesn't bother me too much. I've even had like double decomps in the back, so it's just like, it's really potent, and you're stuck in rush hour traffic. So you're not going anywhere.
I would love to see what the guy in the car next to you was thinking when you had the windows down, and it's basically, you can almost see it. It's so thick and smells so bad as it's wafting out of the windows. Mm-hmm. But I would almost do that on purpose. Leave the windows down and be stuck in traffic. Yeah, just to share with everybody that horrible, horrible stench. But you do get used to it, man. But it never goes away. You never completely get rid of it. What's funny is when you get home and somebody says, you had a decomp today, because you don't realize that it absorbed into your clothes or your hair a little bit or something like that.
Yeah, and you can even get a whiff of it in your nose, like after you've taken a shower sometimes, because the particles or whatever is stuck up in your nose there. So.
What's funny is on a couple of those, you mentioned bed bugs and lice, and I've been on those calls with other guys, and completely coincidentally, we've all gone and gotten our hair cut, but by the time we see each other the next time, because you have that like, I don't know what you call it, sympathy lice or something that you feel like has gotten on you, is running around. So you go home and take a shower and you go get a haircut, and that's the only way to make yourself feel clean again after you've been in some of those situations.
Yeah, sometimes after especially the ones with the infestations, I will get a little bit of the crawly feeling on me after, even though I know there's nothing. I've never taken anything home with me. But still, you just get that feeling, especially when you just see so many everywhere. Most of the time, like, bed bugs are probably the only thing. That and lice might be what bothers me the most. Roaches, I don't really care about anything.
No, because they're not going to crawl in your ears and go home with you. The roaches aren't. But those bed bugs or lice are going to get in all your orifices and go home with you and lay eggs is what they're going to do. What's the good thing is, though, is when you put those in the cooler and you bring those guys out, all the bugs are very inactive because they've been at 36 degrees, and so when they've been in the cooler and you go to move that guy or put him in a different bag or clean him up or something like that, all those bugs are super inactive. But you can tell when they warm up because they'll start moving around. So, anyways, man, that's a pretty wild story. Is it? You obviously will never forget that one.
That one will stick in my mind, as well as many others.
Yeah.
I could even say that there are some calls I've done, just interactions with family, that'll stick with me forever.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
It's not always something that's necessarily, like, gruesome. It's just, the thing I really do love about the job is that you get to see this kind of, like, undiluted truth about, like, life on this planet. Like, all the things that tend to be hidden away from society, we get exposed to just the full brunt of it.
Yeah.
And I love that, to be honest. It's a lot of the highs and the lows, just anything that that we can create in our civilization, it's just all laid bare there for us.
But it's not just that you're seeing it, you're smelling it, sometimes you're hearing it, and you're touching it. So did any of that guy come apart when you were moving him?
He didn't. Most of the time we've done a pretty good job, and there's always the priority to try and maintain the integrity of the decedent as much as possible.
Yeah.
There's sometimes a bathtub removal, if they've been sitting in it for a while, that is where it's probably the trickiest to hold them together, because the water just kind of softens it up. There was one particular one I remember where we had to be extremely delicate in getting him out of that bathtub. But we did it.
You see the degloving in those cases where, so the degloving is where the skin peels off of the hands typically, or any other part of the body, but it can make it very, very difficult to move somebody when that's happening because it's very, very slippery.
My main disappointment with movies that have zombies and corpses is that they never make it look as wet as it should. And that top layer of skin that just sloughs off so easily.
Yeah.
And it's weird too, because like it'll just be a very thin layer, but say if they were a black individual, it'll just be white underneath. And so it just looks surreal sometimes. Or tattoos can actually become much cleaner looking if they were like old ones, if that top layer comes off.
I have never noticed that. Well, there's always a sheen to it also. There's always a wetter sheen that you see. It, like you say, it's always wet, so it always looks like it's a little more shiny than you would typically expect. Mm-hmm. But the other thing that I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen it too in those cases, is where you have maggots moving under the skin, but you can't see the maggots above the skin, and so you can just see literally their skin crawl, which is pretty fascinating. So, well, man, that was a super good story. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think being in this industry, we all talk about what we see and what we hear. And it tends to make us think about, okay, well, what would be my preferred method of death? And I know that's a wacky question, but like, I don't think it's something that people really ever think about or they ever talk about. But do you mind me asking, what would be at this point, based on everything that you've seen, what would be your preferred? How would you want to go out? What would be your preferred method of death?
It changes over the years, but I think my current preference, I have this idea, because I love just the idea of just some kind of vehicular maelstrom. So I had this idea that I would just douse myself in gasoline in the driver's seat of my car while I'm parked right on the edge of a ravine, just light myself on fire, and then just drive right off it like Thelma and Louise.
No kidding.
Yeah. Which is horrible. I'm sure like any kind of cleanup crew would just be so angry at me for telling them that. But I also feel that if it's your choice on how you want to die, then you just get to choose.
So that's assuming you have some sort of terminal illness or something like that.
Yeah,
right?
not like if you're like, not...
Like you're not going home to do that today.
No.
Yeah.
I enjoy my life.
Because you have a shift coming up, too. You don't
Yeah,
want
it's important.
Yeah, so... No, I told the last story, my preferred method is just to be exploded, have nothing left of me. Just be a mist would be great. And then, somebody's going to come in and clean that up and charge a fortune. So it's gonna help somebody out, I'm sure. So, man, I really appreciate you coming to hang out and tell your story. That's a pretty good one.
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, I've seen those before when the rats have gotten like sides of faces and arms, but that's pretty crazy. The bottom of both legs. Mm-hmm. They were just working their way up. Yeah, is what they were doing. So you got to start at the top and work your way down. Rats do it the other way, I guess. So.
There was another I'd seen where it was the skull had been exposed.
Yeah.
It was actually a homeless person that was just living, but because everything else was so tightly covered up, the only thing they could get to was the face.
Yeah.
So it was just a skull.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. Well, man, I really appreciate you coming on the show. This is a great story, and I'm hoping you can come back and do another one sometime if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to, man.
Okay, all right. All right, so our next guest today is Batman, and he is here to share his bioremediation cleanup story. We're happy to have you, man. Thanks for being on the show. So what got you going on this? What got you started with bioremediation stuff?
Well, fresh out of prison, I got a chance to work here, and I was working for a separate part when I got here.
Okay.
But I found my way over this way, and I mean, I've really enjoyed being where I'm at and doing what I do. It's not something a lot of people can do. I know that for sure. People tell me that all the time when they ask what I do, and I explain it to them. A lot of them are like, "Man, I don't know how you can do that every single day, day in and day out, deal with stuff like that." And
really?
Yeah.
It's there's a certain amount of pride that goes with that, isn't there? Right?
Yeah, a little bit. So. And I mean, I could see how some people couldn't deal with the suicides and the homicides and the accidental deaths and stuff like that we clean up, but. I mean, it doesn't seem to bother me too much, so...
Well, you're getting balls deep in, though, man. Yeah. I mean, I don't think people realize that a lot of that cleanup, you're like physically all in on that stuff, man. That it's not just on the floor, it's on the walls and ceiling and drips down on you and everything else. So, what's the hardest part about doing what you do you think?
I mean, one of the difficult parts to deal with on a regular basis for like decomps, for instance, is so that smell for decomps, especially those really bad ones that have been there for 3-4 weeks, and you go in and even with a respirator on, you can smell it through the respirator, and sticks to your clothes afterwards, and that smell will stick in your nose for days afterwards, and certain things will remind you of it. I did a decomp one time. It was bad. I smelled it through the respirator. I got home, washed my clothes, didn't smell it at all, and we had tacos the night before, and I went to reheat the taco meat in the microwave, and the second I opened that microwave, that decomp smell from
it
just hit me. Couldn't do the taco meat that night.
Oh, man, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What's funny is just earlier in the show, we were talking about the decomp odors and stuff like that. And you know what's funny is my wife and I go on vacation, and there's these flowers that we walk by on the side of the road sometimes, and she thinks they smell like honey. I think they smell like decomp.
Yeah.
And it's the weirdest thing because I'll walk by there and I'll think, oh man, something's dead over here.
Yeah.
And she'll say, oh, do you smell those flowers? And so it's weird how your taco meat kicked in the decomp smell is the only thing.
It's a smell you never forget either. It's something that sticks with you for sure.
No, and that's what, man, I mean, it permeates its way into everything.
Yeah.
And so, So, and like I was saying earlier, you'll think that you're fine. You think you're all cleaned up, and you get home, and your wife will say, "Oh, was there a decomp today? Did you clean up it?" Yeah, because it's just embedded in you. So
yeah, there's times we'll get in my car to go somewhere after I'm home and showered and stuff like that, and she'll get in and she said, "Oh, I know what you did today." And
really? Yeah. Even after you showered and everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're here today to share a story with us, man. Have you got something interesting that you want to talk about?
Yeah, a suicide that we did several months back. This was probably 6-7 months ago. We'd gotten a gunshot call pretty late at night. I think it was 7:30. I dispatched a crew down there. The crew was down there for, I want to say, an hour and a half, and they called me and said, hey man, they've done this before, but nothing on a large scale. So they called me and said, we could really use your expertise down here. We're kind of in over our heads in this situation. So I went down there, and by the time I got down there, they had the floor cleaned up, but where this person shot themselves at was in this little shed that they built up, and there's hundreds and hundreds of ammo boxes, those old metal green ones.
Oh, yeah.
All over the place. And it turns out this guy killed himself with a bird shot. So it blew his whole head apart.
Yeah.
So I mean there was splatter everywhere. At this point, it was something that was too much for us to deal with that late at night. So I had to reach out to the family member that called us down there, and explain to them that it was just more than what we thought it was, and that if it's all right with them, I will personally come down the next morning to do the job. My crew had already been there for, like I said, 2.5 hours. They said that was okay, so the next day me and a coworker went down there. We spent, I think we got there at 8:30, and we didn't leave there till probably 7:45 that night.
Oh, really?
Skipped lunch break and everything. Yeah, I mean, we were picking pieces off the ceiling that was this person's jaw with beard hair still attached.
Oh, yeah?
And stuff like that. And those ammo boxes were so dark green that a lot of them you couldn't really see the blood splatter on until you sprayed it with peroxide. So we had to go through and just singly clean hundreds and hundreds of these ammo boxes while we're stacking them outside, and the amount of time that took was just absolutely crazy.
You know what I don't know if people realize, and I'm sure somebody will, and you guys can email us, by the way, at graveconcernmedia@gmail.com. I'm sure somebody's going to tell me I'm wrong, but when somebody uses a shotgun, it's not necessarily the pellet that does the most damage, but it's the explosive gases that are coming out of the barrel that really are what provide the most destructive powers when doing that. So, obviously very different than a gunshot because you don't have nearly as much force coming out of that barrel. But with the shotgun shells, it's that explosive gas, man, that can just atomize human tissue. It's crazy how that happens. So
yeah, and I mean, I've done a lot of suicides and a lot of homicides since I've been here, and it's definitely the largest amount of splatter that I've ever had to deal with, and it's crazy some of the spots that it gets into too, because you'll have these ammo boxes stacked, 4 or 5 high and then 4 or 5 deep, and you'll get like 3 sets back in the row, and on the bottom one, that one has some splatter on it, but the ones around it didn't, and it's crazy how it can get into those little spots like that.
Man, when that stuff is moving through the air, it can change direction. I've seen it go around corners before and stick to the wall.
Yeah.
It just, there's a lot of variations, but that's why, you can't just focus on just the spot. You've got to look everywhere around. And if there's drawers open, you got to look in the drawer to make sure there's not a tooth in there or something. It's
absolutely. I mean, the last thing you ever want to do is clean something, and then days or weeks or months later, when the family's ready to finally deal with that area of where it happened at, for them to be in there and find something that you missed and bring all those memories and feelings back. It's not...
Well, and you look like a total asshole then. Absolutely. You look like you don't know what the hell you're doing. You can do the greatest job in the world, but if there's one little speck left over, it's a horrible job is what happens. So
you got to be really, really vigilant about the way you deal with the family members too. I mean, in this situation, I had to regularly talk to the wife and the brother-in-law, because there were certain areas where I had to end up tearing the trim off of the shed, because they had cleaned the floor up the night before, like I said, and then a couple hours into us working that day, you could see blood kind of coming back out from underneath that trim. So I had to call and say, hey, is it okay if I tear this trim out? Is it okay if I cut this part of the floor out? And just to see the anger and the depression and stuff like that, and their voice and stuff like that when you're dealing with them can be tough sometimes too.
Yeah. Do you find that people are asking you about, in those situations, if they didn't find one originally, do you have people that are coming to you saying, hey, if you find a note, if you find a letter, if you find anything, please let us know right away? I
have in some situations. I mean, there's a lot that I do where, surprisingly enough, family members have already been through. But there are some I do where they haven't been around, and they're like, hey, if you find, I mean, stuff like guns too. I mean, if I've done a decomp before where somebody's like, hey man, we looked, we couldn't find this gun, we think it's in that chair, but we're not touching the chair because that's where he died. Is there any way you guys can get in there and see if it's in there before you toss the chair away, and stuff like that too, so.
So you had mentioned, I was hoping that maybe you could talk a little bit about, you mentioned the use of peroxide. So can you talk about why that's an important tool in your job?
So the peroxide it makes it really, really easy to see where the blood is because of the foam when it hits the blood. But it's also not something you necessarily want to use as your sole purpose cleaner in a situation like that. Like when I went down to that shed, they were using peroxide the whole 2 hours they were down there. And when I walked into the shed originally, the smell was so strong in that shed from the peroxide you could barely breathe.
Yeah.
And they're saying like, we got to go out every few seconds to get a breath because it smells like peroxide so bad. So I suggested to them another cleaning product we use, and I said, well, why don't you guys clean with this and use the peroxide just to check afterwards to make sure that you got all of the spots. You don't need to just clean with that peroxide because that stuff can be overpowering when you're using it in a small area like that.
No, and it's always pretty amazing if you're checking with peroxide, you'll have a large wall area where nothing will happen, but there will be one little tiny spot that'll foam.
Yeah.
And so you'll know that something's there.
And some of that stuff you can't see just by looking at it, so that peroxide plays a big role in making sure that you actually are getting everything that you're supposed to get cleaned up.
You know, if the color of whatever surface, if it's a dark red color and then you've got blood splatter on it and in tiny amounts, it can just be a bitch to see. You'll never be able to be able to see it. So how did that project end?
13 and a half hours into it, we finally got everything off of the ammo boxes. It took a while to get the sealing. The sealing was kind of that popcorn sealing that's in there, which can just be a bitch to clean stuff off of, and pulling, like I said, his jaw pieces out of there and stuff like that. We had to tear the trim off. The wall was soaked underneath the trim, but cutting into that kind of compromised the entire shed. So luckily we were able to kind of sand that down a little bit to get the blood just off the base of that wall right there. And then leading out towards the end of it, we go out and check underneath just in case, and you can see blood dripping down from below too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we had to dig up some of that, stuff rags up in there, and wait for it to soak through. They didn't want us to cut any part of the shed down at the time, which was difficult because I had to let them know, well, just so you know, there's this section that we can't get to underneath this floor unless we actually cut into it. They refused to cut into it. They said, we don't want to do that right now. Can you just stuff some rags up there, try to clean it the best you can in that situation, which we did. Told them if they ever needed to call us back to finish it, they could. They never did, though. But the family was super, super grateful for what we did. We had probably, I think, 5 family members come up to us at the end after we have our truck all loaded and stuff like that, and they shook our hands and said, hey, man, we appreciate everything you guys did. We know how bad that was. Like, you guys saved us a lot of emotional turmoil by coming in and taking care of that for us.
Well, the thing is, man, is that, you don't need somebody like you until you need somebody like you, and people don't realize, when that stuff comes up, it's nice to know who to call.
Yeah.
And so most people are never going to be in that situation where they need somebody to come in and clean up brain and blood from their family member. But man, it's always very rewarding when somebody is so appreciative of what you've done, because it's not a difficult, or it's not an easy task. It's very, very difficult.
Yeah, and those jobs are a whole different ballgame from, like I said, the homicides and stuff like that we do that you don't really have to deal with family members at and stuff like that, so it's nice getting that appreciation from them and knowing that you help them in that way.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. What are your future plans?
Well, I mean, I like what I do here, so I'm sticking this out as long as I possibly can. I mean, I enjoy coming to work every day, so
sure.
Yeah, this isn't something where I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh man, I gotta go to work today. Like, I'm happy to come in here 6 days a week and do what I do. I love doing this for a living, and I personally, myself, feel like I owe the company a lot for giving me a shot right out of prison like I got, because I mean, I could be flipping burgers somewhere for little to nothing, and instead I'm doing something where I make enough money to take care of my family and I enjoy what I do for a living. So
that's great, man.
Yeah. That's
really cool. Yeah. No, there's a lot of unique opportunities out there, but I always feel like this is one of the most unique.
Yeah, I mean, I've done and seen stuff here that normally, I mean, most people go their entire lives with never having to deal with or see, and I've learned a lot since I've been here. So it's been a big help.
Oh, that's great, man. I'm super happy.
Yeah.
Well, you had a great story. That was a really good story.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was. Would you be open to coming back again and sharing another one at some point?
Yeah, I got plenty. Yeah, anytime
you got plenty.
Anytime you guys want me back. Yeah.
Inside and outside, right?
Yeah.
Right on. All right. Well, man, I really appreciate it. I just your story was great. And is there anything you want to talk about or anything you want to add?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's just it's crazy how people ask me all the time what I do, especially when they see you know, the logo on the shirt. And they say, "Hey, do you do this?" And I say, "No, that's actually not what part of the company I'm for. The part I'm for, I mean, I do a little bit of that, but I also do like bioremediation as in crime scene cleanups and suicides and stuff like that. And just the shock people get when they hear that you do that day in and day out, and the fact that random people will be like, well, thank you for there being somebody out there that does something like that. Like, that takes a lot to be able to do that and sleep at night. And
yeah, you don't get that when you tell somebody you work at McDonald's.
no, you do not.
So yeah, so it's very cool. So I don't want to put you on the spot, man, but one thing that I ask the guests, being in this industry, you're basically in the death care industry. You're around a lot of death. And I think it makes people reflect on themselves and how they would want to die if they had the choice. Do you mind sharing? Like, have you ever thought about it?
I mean, I have. So before I got this job, I would have said that because I've gone skydiving twice. I would say jumping out of a plane, no parachute. But now that I've done this job and I know how the cleanup situation goes for the cleanup crews that have to do it, after all of this, I would probably say just at home with my family, fall asleep, and never wake up.
Never wake up. That would be your preferred method.
Yeah.
Right on.
Before this, it would have been jumping out of a plane, but I can't imagine the cleanup that some guy would have to go do over there.
I know, but some guy's going to make his house payment cleaning you up.
That is
so
true.
There's benefits.
To it. Yeah, that is true.
So no, that's pretty nice, man, to be at home and surrounded by your family.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you would want to know you would want to know it was coming. You would want it to be.
Part, yeah, I wouldn't want it to be a surprise. Yeah.
Give you a chance to say your sorries
Absolutely.
or make everything right. Yeah. Right on. No, that's super cool. I appreciate it. Well, this is Last Responder, produced by Grave Concern Media and our fantastic producer, Bruce Sackworth. My name is Boogeyman, and I want everybody to remember every day to clear your browser history. You don't want to die with your browser history well intact.
No, you do not.
All right, man. Well, Batman, I really appreciate you being here and being part of the show, and we look forward to having you back again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The Last Responder.